Robert, how are you?
I'm good. I'm hanging in. How are you doing?
I was doing good. Good because I was about to interview my literary hero, now 82 years old. I'm curious for you as a kid, what got you into storytelling, whether it was reading or other types of storytelling?
I don't know. I was a comic book freak when I was a kid. People always ask me, what were your favorite children's books? I didn't read books. I only read comic books. My friends and I, we carried around big stacks of comics. We would trade them and we would read them under the tree in my front yard. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. And when I was a kid, there were these scary comic books, Tales from the Crypt and The Vault of Horror. I just loved them. They were just bloody, gruesome comics, but they all had funny twist endings. So you see, these were very influential on me.
When he started writing, decades before Goosebumps was ever even a thing, he was writing stuff that was funny under the name Jovial Bob Stine. And when you started writing, you leant into the humor, like you weren't a horror guy initially. I'm wondering where that transition took place.
I can tell you exactly where it took place, but it's sort of an embarrassing story. I never planned to be scary. And yeah, I liked horror. I mean, I think horror is funny. I don't really get scared by it, but I always liked horror, and but I never planned to write it. I was a jovial Bob Stein. I was a joke book writer. I wrote maybe 40 joke books for kids, and I did a humor magazine for 10 years called Bananas, which I edited and wrote most of. I just planned to be funny. And then one day I was having lunch with a woman named Jean Fywell, who was editorial director at Scholastic. And she had just had a fight with a teen horror writer who shall remain nameless, Christopher Pike. And she came to lunch, right? And she said, I'm never working with him again. You could write a good teen horror novel. Go home, write a book called Blind Date. She gave me the title. I didn't know what a teen horror novel was. I had no idea. But I was at that point in my career where you don't say no to anything. You just say yes to everything. And I went running to the bookstore to find out what a teen horror novel was. And I bought books by Christopher Pike and Lois Duncan and Diane Ho and all these Richie Tankersley Cusick, all these people who were writing teen horror so I could find out what it was. And then I wrote this book. It came out, it was a number one bestseller.
I just wanted to interject and say I remember Blind Date well. I read that after I'd gotten into Goosebumps. It was a little bit scarier.
Number one on the Publishers Weekly. I couldn't, what? The funny stuff never made it anywhere near. And then a year later, I wrote another thriller for her called Twisted, number one bestseller. And I thought, forget the funny stuff. I've been scary ever since. And that's exactly how it happened. But it's embarrassing because it was an accident. It wasn't my idea.
I think some of the best things in life are unplanned and accidental. And so I can fully get behind that.
Yeah, I always tell kids that. Don't make plans. Just say yes to everything. You don't know where you're going to end up. I came to New York after college to write humorous novels for adults. That was my ambition. And of course, nobody wants humorous novels for adults. Nobody buy, right? Nobody buys humorous novels. No adults buy humorous novels. And that was my ambition. I had never planned to write for kids. And then I needed a job. I was in New York. I needed work. Answered an ad for Scholastic magazines, ended up at Scholastic, and ended up writing for kids. I always tell people, don't. I was at this meeting of 300 top high school students. And a kid got up. These were the top, very nervous kids. They were top high school students. And the kid said, well, after I graduate, I'm going to start my own company. And then after 5 years, I'm going to sell it. I'm going to go public. Then I'll sell my company. And I thought, oh, is this kid in trouble? I said, you're in trouble. You don't make plans. You never know where you're going to end up.
You mentioned Christopher Pike earlier, and I remember when I was a kid, your name and
I
Pike's.
shouldn't have. I
No,
shouldn't
we
have.
shouldn't have. Let's leave that out of it.
No,
No, but
no.
early in your career, I imagine the landscape for children's books, young adult books, certainly horror was in an entirely different place. You have somehow been this constant that has just continued to do what you do and continued to sell incredibly well, whilst the landscape has changed around you. I'm wondering if you could talk to that at all, or if you don't even notice what's happening around you and you just do what you do.
Well, I don't know if I could do anything else. I don't know. But no, I notice things are changing. I know what's going on in publishing and everything. But everyone's so pessimistic about publishing and about children's publishing. Everyone's so gloom and doom. Kids aren't reading and this. When I started out in children's publishing, the children's division was two women in the back of the office. That was it. That was the children's department. And now it's like a $2 billion industry. Seriously. So someone is reading those books, right?
They are, and they're certainly reading his stuff. And you've got new Goosebumps on the way as well, right?
Yeah, Goosebumps continues. 33 years of Goosebumps. That's 30. That's why I look like this. I'm writing this stuff 33 years. David, I tell you, honest truth, when we started out, I said, let's do two or three of them.
Goosebumps have now sold over 400 million copies around the planet, published in over 30 languages. Robert has a whole other series called Fear Street, 80 million copies sold, not to mention the various TV show adaptations and films.